Welcome to Proper Tease, the podcast that cuts the property industry to the bone. We answer your questions with our expert guests and call out all the bullshit that makes the property industry only slightly more popular than British politics. We are your hosts, Matt Smith.
And I'm Chris Erickson.
And we are your Proper Teasers. We should say that we're very conscious that there's loads of podcasts on the market, and this is just another one. But we are going to be focusing on all things property, as we said, and not that we just like to hear the sound of our own voice, but we think that there's some interesting things that we hope that people will be interested to hear, being as we have been in the property business for such a long time, and there's so many things that are changing all the time.
Yeah. And in terms of sort of how we're going to do the formatting of this, we are going to try to have a guest speaker for most of these episodes.
Yeah, wherever possible.
Whenever possible, that's right. And then we'll talk about some of the sort of hot trends and some of the property news that's current at the moment.
Exactly. So while we've been estate agents for a very long time and letting agents as well, we're not experts in every field to do with property. So that's the idea of getting guests on wherever we can, so that we can have true experts in various different things like the legal profession or architecture or development or anything really, interior design, anything to do with the property market. And we hope that will be interesting to listeners.
That's a very good disclaimer for when we get caught out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good.
Always be sure. And I think it's we should also say that we've both been agents with big corporates throughout our careers. We've both been agents for over 20 years. Mm-hmm. And we've 3 years ago set up our own company, Smith & Erickson. So we're a boutique agent, and we basically work with clients that we're introduced to by word of mouth and by reputation. And it allows us to do this podcast because it's certainly something we'd never be able to do when we were in the previous parts of our careers, because we would have to take into account that we were part of a much bigger organization, whereas now we can be quick and flexible, and we can also be controversial and opinionated, which is what we want to do, right? And we got no chance of being fired because we're not going to fire each other. So.
No, that's right.
Yeah, very good. Okay. One of the things that certainly caught my eye recently, and I think is very much in the news and of concern, I think to both landlords and tenants, is the rental reform bill.
Yeah.
So that's it's not law yet, but it's been a lot of, well, actually not a lot of, but some of the detail of what we can expect has been in the press, and I think one of the things that is most important is the government's proposal to end what's called Section 21, which is a no-fault eviction for tenants, which basically gives the idea being to give tenants more security.
I mean, I think for a lot of people who aren't familiar with the rental reform, should we talk a little bit about what Section 21 actually does? I know it sounds a bit boring, but it's quite an important part.
Quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, after you, Matt.
Oh, thanks. Well, essentially, Section 21 really is it's a way of getting of a landlord bringing a tenancy to an end for what is called a no fault eviction. So, for example, if a tenant isn't paying rent, that you wouldn't use a Section 21, you'd use a Section 8, which is in place to use along with grounds. So, a grounds for ending the tenancy, for example, if there's non-payment of rent. But a Section 21 is basically the landlord is saying, I just want my property back. You've been great tenants. Thanks very much. But I'm ending the tenancy. Yeah. And I think that what I think is they're trying to prevent is that if a landlord decides he wants to double the rent, for example, and he can't do that with that existing tenancy, he's going to end that tenancy and start a new tenancy at a much higher rent. Which, and this, I think, I'm afraid, I mean, we'll discuss this in a lot of detail, but I think once again, it's a bit sort of demonizing all landlords, saying that all landlords are greedy, slum landlords, which I don't think is the case. Although I'm sure there are plenty that are that have got tenants. You see it in the news, with tenants paying exorbitant amounts of rent, and there's mold and damp and terrible conditions, and every time the tenants ask the landlord to rectify something like that, then they will say, well, if you want us to fix that, then we're going to end the tenancy and you're going to be homeless.
I think that's one of the biggest issues, is where tenants have made sort of perfectly legitimate reasons,
right?
Requests to improve the quality of substandard accommodation, and landlords have sort of gone, you don't like it, you're out.
Yeah.
Just looking at the stats here, that's 4.4 million households made complaints over the last 3 years under this Section 21. So it's obviously a significant issue. But you're right. It sort of demonizes landlords because, in all our careers, I've only come across it a couple of times where tenants are being evicted for no-fault eviction laws. The majority of the time, and Matt, you know this, we had a client, we had to go through this. It's very, very challenging to get them out. Tenants, that is.
Yeah, you mean when they're not paying rent?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have had, fortunately, not very many cases, but, over a career of over 20 years, you are going to come across them where a tenant isn't paying rent. And it is very, very difficult to get them out of the property. It can take months or even years, depending on the circumstances,
and at a cost,
at a huge cost. And actually, Kris, some of the reforms that the government is proposing here is to have a tribunal or a body that both landlords and tenants can take their concerns to without incurring huge costs. So I think that is a very good thing. And actually, look, as an agent, I'm not opposed to ending Section 21 because I think that there should be good accommodation for tenants and there should be long-term tenancies in place, but the private landlord there is a surprising amount of the rental stock. I think it's something like 1 million properties to rent in London, and we can only really talk about London. 65% of that are private landlords, with 1 or 2 properties, and these are the landlords that are going to be most scared by this. It's not going to be the institutional landlords where there's been a big increase in the private rental sector, where there's whole buildings that are for rent under the management of a company.
PRS.
Yeah. So, this is going to be pretty scary because the devil is definitely going to be in the detail, as with all these things, and we'll be watching this very closely. But what is going to matter is that a landlord supposedly will be able to get their property back if they want to sell it and move in themselves, or for a family member to be able to move in. So, in theory, that should be enough, really. If you're a landlord who wants to let out a property long term, then what's the problem? But I think that this is going to be very much come down to the detail of how this is going to be policed. And I think what's also actually, there is something for landlords here as well, is that it's going to be easier if a tenant isn't paying rent, or they're a problem tenant. It's going to be actually easier to get them out. So, we were talking about a minute ago, saying that it can take months or even years to get a tenant out. This supposedly will make it easier. Although how this is going to be enforced, I think is questionable, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Let's see what they do.
And I was thinking about sort of, the rules of eviction under this new Reform Act, right? If you have a tenant who's complaining too much, or who's not paying what they think is fair rent, and they're prohibited now from increasing the rent, what stops any landlord from just saying, well, I want to move in, or
exactly.
Make it even easier and say, I have a family member who wants to move in, or I want to put it for sale,
right?
And that evicts the tenants anyway.
Yeah,
because it looks like the government's biggest reason for doing this is to tackle homelessness. Yeah. So that's the sort of prerogative they're using for this reform bill. But as you said, the devil in the detail.
Because what it could easily do is cause a whole lot of the smaller private landlords to say, all right, excuse my French, but fuck this, I'm out. Yeah. I'm going to sell this property now, and I'm done. Because also there have been a lot of changes over the years which have made it less attractive to be a landlord. You can no longer claim the interest on your mortgage. It's becoming harder and harder to offset costs against your tax bill. Plus, obviously, there's the additional 3% stamp duty if you're buying a property to be a landlord, which has just made it more and more and more expensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who would be a landlord? I think it was also when property prices were rising quite considerably, and stamp duty was a lot cheaper, it made a lot of sense to buy rental properties, and that. The argument was, well, you're pricing out first-time buyers, but at the same point in time, it's very difficult to be a first-time buyer because you've got to save up a deposit for a mortgage plus pay to live in London, which, as we all know, is exorbitantly expensive. So people would rent, and now there's less properties to rent, so rent is so expensive, it's even harder to save for a deposit to be a first-time buyer, right?
Absolutely, and which we'll talk about in detail later on in a different topic about sort of debt accrued by the younger generation. But on that, I saw a stat which said that 65% of all buy-to-let landlords are between the ages of 45 and 72.
Yeah.
So that's almost half of all of them. So you can see the younger generation just can't get onto the property ladder. But also in terms of sort of repairing and making good, and also thinking that suddenly you have a property that's not up to standard. Can the landlord afford to make the changes?
Well, that's right.
They probably can't, because they bought this as an investment, because this country, the UK, is obsessed about owning your own property, right? Much more so than the rest of the continent, where renting is a very common setup. And they thought, well, they'll appreciate in value, double every 10 years. And, in 40 years, that'll be my retirement.
Right.
And that's true for the sort of 50 plus. But for everyone else coming into the market now, particularly right now where prices are quite high and predicted to drop, and also you have to put in 25, 30% deposits on a property that's quadrupled in value over the last 20 years. Yeah. So, and rents have gone up by 25, 30%. It's a ticking time bomb, which we'll discuss later in detail as well. But I also noticed that one of the good things about this reform is that it is also meant to blanket out pet bans.
Yes.
Because most people nowadays, particularly during the pandemic, sort of got their little furry friend at home. And that's always been an issue where people have sort of said, oh, well, I've got a small dog, or I've got a large dog, or a cat, or a ferret, whatever it might be. But they don't allow it, or they haven't allowed it, and they didn't have to allow it, and now they have to.
That's right. I mean, the press has called it a blanket ban, that there's been a blanket ban up to now. I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. I mean, I think it's been basically up to the landlord whether or not they're willing to allow a pet.
And the managing agents of the building.
And the managing agents, absolutely, of the building. So whether the building allows animals at all on the leases, and actually there's a surprising amount who don't. Look, we're both animal lovers, and we both have animals. So I think it's great that this is happening. But again, it's going to be, what is this actually going to do? So it's great that people will not have to give away animals. Let's say if they have to move, or they're forced to move, and they have to move into a place that doesn't allow animals, that poor animal gets put with battered dogs and cats home, or something like that. So that is a good thing. But will landlords, for example, say, okay, well, I'm not allowed to refuse, but I'll find a way around that. I'll say, well, I've got another offer. I've got,
that's right.
Or from somebody else. Or might they say, well, do you know what? If I'm going to be forced to do this, I'll keep my rental flat, but I'm not going to have furniture because I don't want to deal with the damage of the furniture. So maybe there'll be a load more unfurnished flats, which also might not be great, because I think if people are at the lower end of the bracket and want to rent something, maybe they haven't got the funds to go and buy their own furniture, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the additional details to this particular proposal said that they may have to introduce a mandatory insurance policy.
Yeah,
for the tenants to take out.
Is it for the tenants to take out?
It's for the tenants to take out on their pets in case they damage the property.
I thought it was something to do with the pet insurance is required by so it says building owners will be able to require pet insurance to cover any damage to their property. Okay, building owners. All right, so I suppose property owners, I guess the owner of the flat. Right. Yeah.
I mean, most of us have insurance on their pets, but the idea being here that comes at a tremendous cost, and it does. It's, one dog. I used to have two dogs, and they were both over £1,000 a year on insurance policies, and that didn't cover contents damage. So
so another additional cost for the landlord.
That's right.
There you go. I mean, back in the day, when we approached a landlord with a tenant who had a pet, they would often ask for an increase in the deposit. But there's also recently with ASTs, you're only allowed to ask for 5 weeks deposit. You're not allowed to ask for any more than that. So let's see, like all of these things, let's see what actually happens, because I think when the government tries to tinker with the property market in any way, it normally has surprising effects. Exactly. So let's see. But on the face of it, I think it's great for people to have pets. I think it's wonderful for children, especially, to have pets. It helps learn about responsibility, about caring just about caring generally. And also, unfortunately, when animals die, it's also often a child's first experience of death.
Yeah, that's true.
So I mean, I think this is a good thing if it's managed properly and doesn't cause landlords to say, okay, this is just the final nail in the coffin.
The other thing as well, which is an even bigger thing, is that this reform is also looking to stop potential landlords from refusing families with children.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking sort of particular sort of young mothers perhaps who are divorced and these sort of things, but it hasn't specified that. But from experience, that tends to be the issue that comes up. And also people are on benefits.
That's right.
So how on earth they're going to police that? Again, I'm not sure, because you could just say you have other interest and choose another tenant who doesn't come with this sort of excess baggage, if you like.
I was through the years, we've had some landlords that said, I'm happy to have what they used to call DSS. We used to get the calls saying, do you take DSS? And they were perfectly happy, but the majority didn't, because it just brought with additional troubles. But I thought that you couldn't refuse anyway already with, I think it was the agent couldn't refuse, but then they would just use the excuses, well, the landlord doesn't want that. But so if they're saying, no, the landlord can't refuse. But again, as you rightly say, Kris, how on earth are they going to police that? The landlord say, well, actually, do you know what? I've decided I'm moving back in, or I've got another offer, or, the ceiling's falling down. I'll have to call you back in 2 or 3 weeks when I'm ready to rent it out again, right? I mean, how are they going to fill it? What we need is the government to build some affordable housing, genuinely affordable housing, or private rented sector built by the government.
So that's an interesting topic you raised there, because that's obviously the biggest thing. The current government in power has shelved the sort of £300,000 a year, 300,000 homes a year policy, right? Because they were nowhere near hitting it. I think they were under 10,000. Best of times. Homelessness has increased by 76%. Year on year, and that is what this reform
That's
is.
A huge percentage.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's come up now at around 6,000 homeless people or households that were threatened with homelessness in England as a result of the Section 21 orders between April and June 2022. So that is a massive increase, and that's probably why Michael Gove has sort of been pushed into trying to find some sort of reform to tackle this.
Any excuse but to build more housing.
Exactly. Right? But then the question sort of begs, is the government the best body to build affordable housing, or should they be sort of incentivizing developers to do this? Because it comes at a huge cost.
It does.
And building social housing like they did in the 60s, I don't know what the actual costs are, but you can't build homes like that anymore, as you've seen, because most of them have had to be redone, knocked down, and rebuilt. But I guarantee you that it's probably 5 or 6 times more expensive now. Who's going to foot that bill? We have an economy that's sort of free falling at the moment, and no money in the coffers, right? So how are you going to build 300,000 affordable homes?
Well, I think you're right. Okay, so the government can't necessarily fund it themselves, so they should incentivize developers, there's got to be truly affordable housing, because as we know, developments that are supposed to have a certain percentage of affordable housing often don't.
No, certainly not on site.
Somewhere else. Right, look, I mean, even if it's not on site, I don't necessarily see that as a huge problem, as long as they are building it somewhere fairly central. That people can have a home that's in London, be part of London, make London what the whole reason that London was so cool after the war, and right up until fairly recently, we won't say the B word, it was because people could afford to live here. I mean, they weren't living in the best accommodation, but you could afford to live in London and be not only a key worker, but a waiter or a barman or work in a club or in a shop, and you wouldn't have to live on the outskirts of beyond. That is imperative. We've got to have proper affordable housing. And okay, maybe if a developer is going to build something that's got a bowling alley and a members bar and a cocktail lounge, I think people get into an uproar of, oh, well, the affordable housing people can't use those. That's totally unfair. No, I don't think it is. I think as long as the developers are building these developments and there is genuinely affordable housing there, they can have another entrance. They can have their own communal gardens as part of that. It doesn't have to be what motivates developers to build is huge profits, and they have to therefore sell these massively expensive flats. Fine, that's one market. Then let's have that same developer providing affordable houses that normal people can use, and maybe there's a less fancy gym and there's a shared workspace there, for example, something like that, and a nice communal garden. Great. I mean, I would love to have lived in something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget that these sort of amenities that we're talking about are paid for. by the owners of these apartments through their service charges.
Massive service
and they're
charges.
huge, you know, 10,000-15,000 pounds in some cases. So they're more than paying their fair share for those services.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting also, and I think it's something else we're going to touch on a little bit later, is the reason it's so expensive is because the way that we build things in this country hasn't changed in a very long time. And if we look at things like modular flat pack properties, which are very popular in
my home country.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, I think why not? Because they're looking, you know, it's not like you're in a crate or a shipping container. You know, these are actually really nice modular properties that are they're built off site and they're put together so quickly.
They can put these together in less than 2 days. And I'm not talking a full module house here, but in terms of its sort of structure, can be put together in 2 days and then refitted. It can be done in less than 2 weeks.
Amazing. I mean, that's what we need to be focusing on. I think there needs to be a shift in what people's attitudes to what constitutes a nice home, right?
And I think that's interesting you say that, Matt. Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because it's attitudes towards this that's changing as well. You see suddenly, you know, Berkeley Homes were recently in the papers because they were trying to build this huge development. Was it in Kent? In the Greenbelt area, and then there was huge uproar because it doesn't look in place with the scenery and everything else. And so, you know, how are we going to build 300,000 homes every year? Affordable 300,000
with the NIMBYs.
Yeah, exactly. With the NIMBYs, not in my backyard. With this constant complaint about, well, it's not architecturally right. We cannot build the same sort of properties that we built in the 1860s. You know, it's not affordable. They're beautiful, but it's not affordable.
Right. And why not build on the Greenbelt? Let's have developments that are green, built on the Greenbelt, with lots of green space within these neighborhoods or developments or wherever they end up being, you know. And also, I think a lot of the green belt, that they call it the green belt, you picture these wide open fields and forests and things. That's not necessarily what a lot of this land is. Right. So yes, I mean these are all things that all have changed. Look, before we move on to that, because I think that is another section to talk about. What we want to talk about the building industry is just to finish off this legislation in terms of tenants. When are these legislative changes going to come in?
Well, they don't know yet. A couple of years. I mean, there are some people that are skeptic that this will ever come in. You know, we will most likely have a change of government next year, and then there'll be a new housing minister. You know, number 15 in the last 5 years, whatever it is, and there'll be new policies. You know, Keir Starmer is very keen on trying to increase the volume of social housing, or affordable housing, should I say. And Michael Gove is trying to sort of make it easier for tenants. I mean, both are valid, but they're sort of almost counteractive to each other, right? You can't protect tenants too much without hurting the landlords, and then that affects the housing market in different ways as well. So I'm not entirely sure that this reform will go through as it is sort of put forward today. And as we've discussed, there are several issues here as well, right? In terms of how you enforce it and what's the detail. And, you know, from the outset, it sounds good. It sounds sort of like 50-50, right? Landlords can get tenants out if they're sort of antisocial behavior, not paying rent. But equally, tenants have more rights now, and it's harder to get them out. So, you know, where's the middle ground?
That's right. I mean, I think, you know, if they're talking about things like giving councils the powers to ban unscrupulous landlords from marketing in areas. So what is an unscrupulous landlord exactly? And how are they going to ban these landlords? I mean, how is that going to work? There's a lot to be unpicked here, and I think let's see how it's. But as you say, this isn't going to come out anytime soon. Certainly not this year, 2023. I mean, who knows what will happen? There'll be an election in 2024, and I mean, let's see what's going to happen. Okay, well, I think that's probably it for that particular topic. Let's also talk about the debt bomb, as Hugo Rifkind recently described it in the Times. I'm a big fan of Hugo Rifkind.
Yeah, he's a great writer.
So, what is the terrifying debt bomb that he was talking about?
Yeah, so the debt bomb that he's talking about, it's actually incredibly scary when you think about it. And the reason why it's not spoken about as much as it should be is because it tends to affect the sort of middle to upper end of households. And most of those people, they feel too guilty to raise this topic.
So middle to upper end, you mean like middle classes and above, or the middle classes? Because I don't think the super rich or the very
well, they're talking. Well, they're not talking about the super rich because the media loves two extremes, right? It's either the billionaires on their yachts in Dubai earning, whatever they're earning, and then it's the sort of mother of 7 children who can't afford to feed them, right? There's no in between, right? But the middle class, is anyone from earning sort of £45,000 up, right? And the average wage in London right now sits around 50. So if you have 2 income earners,
is the average rate 50?
Yeah, it's 50,000.
Gosh, okay.
Yeah. It's a little bit less than that.
30 or 35.
No, it's about 47,000 something, but let's just round it up for ease. But say you have 2 income earners, both earning £50,000. Well, that's £100,000 income, right, in the household. Seems like a lot of money. We'll talk about why that's not a lot of money in a minute when you sort of take in all the costs and the interest rates and everything else. But these are the people that are going to be affected. And they said that 40% of the middle class to upper end are going to be affected in the next 5 years because they'll be renewing their mortgage.
Right, because their fixed terms are coming to an end.
Yeah.
And so, when they fixed, they were at 1.5 or 1.35 even percent. And now they're going to be looking at potentially 4, 5, 6, 7%.
Yeah, I did some maths last night and this morning.
I'm glad you didn't ask me to do the maths. Yeah, they would all be gone.
And it's early in the morning, and I'm not going to bore you with all the figures, but to understand this debt bomb, I had to look at the figures, and so I looked at the Office of National Statistics, and I looked at the inflation, etc., and I took a couple of things. I took this sort of average wage, and I compared it to 3 different years. So 1990. Interest rates were about 15%. So I thought I'll start there to see, because that was a calamitous period, right? And we hear so often that people say, well, what are you worried about? Interest rates are going up. They're 4.5, historically low, right?
Yeah. And
I'll talk to, we'll go through as to why this is a massive problem.
Yeah.
And then I used 2018, and then I looked at 2023. And I looked at the average wage in London, the average cost of a home in London, the average interest rate in London, and what those monthly repayments would be. And when you take all that together, you can do a ratio of how much are you having to pay in respect of your earnings, right? And this is where it gets really scary. And one of my favorite films, as you know, Matt, is The Big Short with Steve Carell. I absolutely love that movie. And there's a scene there where he's being interviewed towards the end of the movie, and he's sitting there with the managing director for Bear Stearns. And he's sort of arguing that the financial world's about to collapse. And this guy's saying, no, I'm very optimistic, and I'll buy more stocks in my own company, etc. And as this interview's going through, all the audience members are sort of panicking because they're seeing the stock just drop down to almost zero. And as it basically goes into liquidation in the 5 minutes of this interview, Steve Carell sort of turns to the camera and goes, kaboom. And that was the sort of moment the financial crisis started. And when you see this ratio to earnings figure I'm about to tell you, it's a similar sort of moment.
Go on then.
So, first of all, just to put it into context, in 1990, the average home in London was £73,000. Now, if you factor in inflation and take everything else into account, that's about £250,000 today.
Okay.
But the average home in London today is £525,000. Yeah. So it's doubled, more than doubled over inflation. And that's not surprising. The average interest rate in 1990, 15%. In 2018, 2.14%. And today it is 5.44 for a 2-year fixed. That's about as good as you can get.
Which still sounds like it's much better than it was in the 80s.
It does.
What you say is,
but you had, property prices have doubled more than inflation, right? So your monthly repayment in 1990 on a £73,000 home over a 30-year mortgage, which is where we've sort of based it on, was £972 a month. In 2018, it was £1,900 a month. In 2023, it is £2,950 a month.
Wow.
Now, to take that into consideration of your earnings, in 1990, and this was a turbulent year, right? 61% of your income, your monthly income, went onto the mortgage. 61%. In 2018, it was 57%.
Yeah.
In 2023, it's 82% of your income goes towards your mortgage.
God, that's crazy.
And there is your kaboom moment. Now, the reason it's not being spoken about is because a lot of people are still fixed into their 2.14, 2.3% interest rate, but they're going to come off that and they're going to have to remortgage at 5.5%, maybe 6%. Then factor in the fact that energy prices have increased by 50% in the last year.
Yeah.
Service charges are impacted because of that.
Yeah,
and they have increased
costs,
as well.
That's right.
And it doesn't, I mean, just the 50% increase in energy prices alone, along with 82% of your earnings going towards your mortgage.
Yeah, and of course, the energy costs and all of that trickles right through to food inflation, which actually just this morning dropped below double digits for the first time since last summer.
Yeah.
So hopefully that will slowly start to come down. But I mean, they are massively, massively high. Yeah.
I mean, the only saving grace and why some people aren't going to be sort of outed from their properties is that £2,950 is what you'd pay on a monthly repayment today on a £525,000 home. But some people have double incomes, right? So, husband, wife, partners, whatever it might be. So there's a double income there, right?
But they've often got a double income because they've got to pay for school fees, or they've got to pay for childcare. I mean, if you are a couple that has children and you're both working, then someone's got to look after the kids.
Yeah, that's right.
And the way that the culture is here, it's very rare that you've got a mother or somebody, a grandmother rather, living in the same house that could potentially handle some of the childcare like they do
on the continent.
In the continent, exactly, where it's more of the village mentality. Take a village to raise a child. Well, I mean that those are terrifying figures, and in that column, it's the middle classes where it's often not discussed because of the embarrassment of we're homeowners as opposed to the younger generations who are maybe never going to own a home or going to be well into their 40s before they do.
Yeah, and the article talks about a couple of sort of people that have been interviewed for this article in terms of their situation, etc. And one particular chap in this article talks about the fact that when he tells his grandfather, what the cost of this mortgage is, he sort of, falls off the chair and sort of says, well, you're an idiot. Why would you do that, right? And he's sort of saying, well, what choice do I have?
Yeah.
It's like, one couldn't buy a home for £8,000 back in the, today and pay it off in 15 years and then, live mortgage free for the rest of your life. Now you're paying 30-year mortgages.
Yeah.
And, we've just moved place, right? So, I looked at what you end up paying back, and you end up paying back, of course, more than the loan, right? So,
much more.
Yeah. So, it says here the average first-time London mortgage today is £358,741, right? You'll end up paying back almost £1 million over 30 years.
And that's just the mortgage. That doesn't take into account the deposit.
Or inflation. So, that could be $2 million by the end of that 30 years, right? That you've actually paid back.
It's crazy.
And the whole, everyone under the age of sort of 55 is now in this debt spiral.
Yeah.
And that's what this ticking debt bomb is, that it's about to sort of come to an end now, unless something, radical happens, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of people being able to afford to live the way they used to.
Yeah. We might start seeing some scary headlines and some horrible situations. And for us as agents, I mean, I remember in 2008 where we had quite a lot of clients that were in the financial industry who got laid off when the bank started going under. And
which is happening right now. And, the banking sector...
being very quiet about it.
Yeah, they are. You're right. They are. And I don't know why exactly, but, the banking sector is not in a good place. We've had 2 big banks default.
Yeah. And the way that you can get money out of the banks now has changed completely. It's in your pocket, right?
Yeah.
You can just get your money out straight away. You don't have to queue up to do it.
No, that's right. And also, the tech sector is the new banking sector, if you like. That's where the real money is.
That's right.
And they are laying off people by the droves. And that's got nothing to do with AI, which is scary enough on its own in terms of laying people off and what are we going to do? But
I'm going to need a Xanax after this. So, look, I mean, I think so I think, well, let's see how this plays out. But what we're seeing on what we're seeing on the property market is, and I think all agents would have to agree that it's been a much slower spring market, which is traditionally a very busy market.
Yeah.
And this has got to be why, because not only have people had to completely reassess what they can afford, because if you were buying something at 1.5 or 1.35%, say, for example, which was a very, very good rate, 1.35. I was on 1.35 before I had to remortgage recently, which was a hell of a shock, I can tell you. So if you were looking at a budget of, say, let's say you were looking at a house for £2 million in Battersea or Fulham or somewhere, you can no longer afford that.
No. And you can't save up for it either, because rents have gone up by 25%. So there's nothing left.
But Kris, not only can you not afford it, you have to radically rethink what you can afford. Maybe you've gone from 2 million to 1.25. I mean, that is a totally different type of property.
And that's the point, right? Is that we're talking about the sort of lowest income generators and the highest, but £2 million is a hell of a lot of money.
It's a huge
but it is not an uncommon budget in London.
No,
a lot of people have that money.
They do.
And they are hardworking people, and they often sacrifice time with their families and their children. They, two incomes, mum and dad, or whatever the case is, are both working flat out to be able to afford this mortgage. And then add 40% cost on top of that, and tell me that they're not going to be affected. Oh, they're all right. They're £250,000 income, household wise. Well, you're adding 40% to that.
Yeah,
that's school fees gone. If that's the case, that's holidays gone.
Right.
How do we afford to pay for food? They've gone up 50% as well.
Yeah.
So, it's a ticking debt bomb for sure.
It is, and again, I'm afraid it comes down to lack of housing stock as well. And not allowing London to spread. I read something recently, I can't remember where it was, but they were talking about, I think it was the Danish model of the green belt. Rather than spreading out as a circle, as a radius, you spread out along train tracks, so like fingers. Exactly. Okay. So you go into the green belt, but you're building along railway lines in fingers rather than spreading out, and that way you save what we could arguably call the green belt, which I thought was a good idea. But again, it comes down to there has to be more housing with easy commutes for people to get to work, which is also a whole other subject. How much are people commuting into certain places? But even so, if you're spreading out in fingers, you're creating villages. And if people are working from home, then they will be supporting that community, local restaurants, local coffee shops, whatever, local dog walkers, etc., etc. If you are working, you're still working, right? It's in theory, whether you're working from a home office or whether you're commuting, people are still going to have to work until the AI overlords put us all out of work, obviously, which I think can bring us on quite nicely to our new topic. We're not going to talk about AI because absolutely everyone is constantly, but this is kind of AI.
Yeah, and I love talking about AI, so let's not get me started on AI. It's just the AI bricklayers.
Yeah, absolutely. So another industry which has been quite resistant to change, or one of the industries that's been resistant to change, apparently is the building industry, and I think we can probably say that's probably true. So this is a story about a robot brickie.
Yeah, replacing the human builders, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a crazy idea, but what I thought was quite interesting about it was that the reason that this is a good thing is because it's not that it's putting people out of work. It's that there aren't enough builders, and the average age of a brickie is 50. And they will mostly want to retire. The average age of retiring is 56. Yeah. And there's not a lot of new people coming into this industry because it's backbreaking work, and younger generations don't want to do this kind of work. And who can blame them? Well, I've always thought it would be great fun to work on a building site.
I worked on a building site a couple of summers along with my brother-in-law, who was very handy, ex-Marine captain. He knew how to build things, and I did it for fun. It was fun at the age of 15, 16, but oh my God. I mean, you come home, you can't feel any part of your body. Well, that's actually wrong. You feel every part of your body. Yeah, it's in agony. And you don't earn that much money either.
Well, that's the thing. You don't.
So why on earth would you do it? And now with technology, I mean, kids today, they barely know how to socialize properly unless it's in front of a computer. So to get them out to the playground is hard enough work. Never mind getting them onto a building site.
Right. So, but what's interesting about this, Kris, is that this machine that's been invented, which we can talk about a bit, but just what caught my eye. It can lay what you lay? Do you labor it? You lay bricks, yeah. 3,000 bricks a day compared to a human, which is 500 a day.
Yeah.
So I mean that'll get some houses built, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is that you have this bricklaying machine. So let's say you have we'll talk about very simple shapes, because it's very much in its infancy. But let's say you have a square of 2 meters by 2 meters, then tracks run around the outside of the property, and you program this robot of the size of the property, and you have one person loading bricks onto this machine, and you have another person checking how it's laid the bricks to make sure it's, nothing's gone wrong, and it can lay 3,000 instead of 500.
And also with precision, because as the article goes on to discuss, it says that these machines use several laser points.
Yeah.
So that they account for wind, which is apparently a bigger issue once you get higher up.
Yeah, 9 meters or higher, because is that, I don't know. It's when you get to a certain height, the wind factor
moves like 10 millimeters, something like that. Exactly,
yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And actually, we know that from having sold very exclusive flats in very high buildings, right?
Yeah.
The building moves.
It does.
You can feel it moving.
Yeah. That was fun the first time.
Yeah. Luckily, it's designed to do it.
Yeah.
And so these sort of robots can account for that. They also, which I thought was really interesting, and this is just part of the AI, but obviously they're pre-programmed with the entire blueprint of whatever they're building. So, as opposed to sort of saying, well, you do this, you do that, let's go back and check, let's go back into the project management office, let's have a coffee, a beer, whatever the case might be, and discuss what the next step is. This robot knows exactly where it is at all points and makes adjustments accordingly.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely the future. It's being resisted, apparently.
I'm sure it is.
By everyone in the industry.
Everyone at the moment, I think, is terrified that they're going to be taken over, their job's going to be taken over by a robot or by AI. And look, a lot of jobs are going to be taken over, aren't they? I'm sure there'll be a very attractive estate agent bot at some point that will go around and be showing properties. But I think that's probably a long way off.
Yeah, I think we're definitely irreplaceable for now, Matt. But
45,000 vacancies at the moment in the building industry.
Yeah.
And construction workers in Britain are falling by percentages every year.
And also they have been falling for a very long time. So that's why this stat is so important, right? The fact that the average age is 50 and the retirement age is 56, because what brickie wants to be on a site at the age of 60? No one. I don't think they're physically able to do it anymore.
Yeah.
But, add to the fact that Brexit and COVID have absolutely decimated the workforce.
And it has, in the last 5 years. Prices, yeah.
And there is the B word,
mm-hmm.
But it has a major impact because we sell a lot of properties on a lot of new developments, and the workers that are on those developments, are European workers. They're not native British workers. Maybe in some of the higher skilled jobs, but not to say that none of those jobs are highly skilled. They are if you've ever been on a construction site, but you know what I mean.
And even for private homeowners, it's unless you've got a huge amount of money and you're generally, unfortunately, the reality is you're going to get a cheaper quote from somebody who's sending money back to another country than the British worker can afford to quote at, because they obviously aren't, and they're living here. And I suppose that was one of the main reasons that I guess Brexit happened, is to want these jobs to go to British people. But the reality is
want to do the job.
They don't want to do the jobs.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
So maybe hopefully we can have some British made robots, and we're not importing them from somewhere else.
It's interesting you talk about sort of the cheaper scaled, cheaper labor force that comes from Europe into the UK. When we spoke to our photographer Maciek, he was saying that he's from Poland, and he said he had gone back home to his beautiful sort of city, and he said he was looking at buying a property, and he said that it's not that much different now in prices compared to London.
Yeah.
And my better half is also from Poland, and she's from a beautiful city called Krakow, which is absolutely gorgeous. And when I've been there 3 or 4 times now, and in the 3 or 4 times I've been there, you can see the developments coming up.
Yeah.
And remarkably enough, I recognize the sort of the style of buildings. It's very so much your Berkeley Homes type development.
Although that's all over the world, isn't it?
It is, to be fair, but a lot of these builders,
and where
that's true.
From.
That's true. But they have different planning laws there as well. But these builders are the most highly skilled builders there.
It's absolutely booming. My I say better half, I suppose. So my better half is actually working on an airport in Poland at the moment, and it looks absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it did.
When he's just come back from there and then said, it's just absolutely booming.
So Brexit's benefiting the rest of Europe by the sounds of it.
Let's not ever mention the B word. Let's never mention it again. Well, and then also I think that brings us back to what we briefly touched on before, which is flat pack homes.
Yeah.
and how I think these are so important.
So I've seen these actually produced and installed, because in Sweden, which is where I'm from, this has been going on for a long time now. The housing stock in Sweden is very different, right? So in the cities, it's bricks, it's stone, just like it is here, right? Going back, and they're protected, so they can't be changed. But modern, there's a lot of green belt area in Sweden, right? It's a huge country with a small population, so there's a lot of land, and it's mostly wooden houses. But wooden houses are insulated 10 times better than what we live in here, right? And they are plumbed, they are pre-plumbed before they're installed. So all the services are put in there, and they do that relatively quickly. They can connect the pipes, electricity, gas, the whole lot. And then they build them literally like flat packs. And then, a machine does all this. It's pre-made, prefabbed, and then they come on these big ferries. They're unloaded, and then they're put up. And houses put up over a weekend.
Well, why do you think there's such a resistance to it here? Is it the building industry, or do people not want to buy them? Because look, I think we can certainly comment on, do people want to buy them? I mean, I think
I'll tell you what, from the light aspect and from heating and all these sort of things, I mean, these are so energy efficient.
Right.
You think how are we not doing this?
If you think about how hard it was when we started in our previous life before Smith & Erickson, we were both selling very modern properties for quite a few years, weren't we?
Yeah, we were.
And it around about, I guess it was 2006, there started to be a lot of new build in London, and trying to get people interested when they'd call you up. We're sitting in an office in Chelsea where the majority of the stock is traditional. Trying to get them into a modern flat was almost impossible.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, 2023, people are loving modern properties, right? They love the lateral space. They love the EPC ratings and
the light,
ease, right? The big floor to ceiling windows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a shift that needs to happen if people can see the advantage of it. But why aren't they being built? I mean, I agree with you. I think that this is just something that is the solution.
No, 100%. You're right, though. It is a mindset. It's something that's never been done. And also, a lot of European countries are, whilst old in history, they're quite new in terms of, their establishment, their sort of laws and everything else. Right? The UK, one of the reasons why buying properties in the UK and in London particularly, where we have a whole leasehold and the freehold owners and everything else, is because the law goes back 500-600 years, and it doesn't get updated long enough. We talked about pets not being allowed, and now you can no longer do that, right? But as if the landlord has that option, right? You mentioned it earlier. Most leases don't allow it. And these leases were written 100 years ago. I can barely make sense of it because it's ye old English, right? But they need to be updated, and so it all starts from sort of the paperwork.
Michael Gove was talking about trying to massively reform the whole leasehold freehold thing, and I think it's done a bit of a screeching U-turn there, and talking more in terms of capping ground rent, right? Yeah.
But that's because the freeholders are also some.
Well, sure. I mean, how do you unravel that? I mean, again, I think Michael Gove, for his faults, is a very hardworking minister and is actually trying to get things done. But boy, I don't know how do you reform this? I mean, I'm South African, you're Swedish. You've got friends in the States. When you buy properties in those countries, you're committed straight away. You can't pull out because everything is known about the property beforehand, right?
That's right.
There's no surprises after you've agreed it and then potentially get gazumped, or you find out that ramblers can walk through your front garden, or that you've got to give access to somebody, or you've got to pay for the roof of the church, or there's all of these things should be up front. And I think government tried to do that years ago. What was it, back in sort of 2003 with HIPS, the Home Information Pack, which
in theory was a really good idea, but
because it didn't go far enough. Nobody had or the government didn't have the guts to actually implement something properly. But I mean, I remember at the time there was a massive outcry that it was going to completely ruin the sales industry because speculative sellers said, I'll sell it if you get me this price, but they wouldn't pay to have a home information pack, But then I think people complain and moan about this, about the industry, of how it works in not even the UK, in England, because it's different in Scotland as well. It needs massive reform.
It needs a total reform.
And it needs digitizing as well.
Well, which is happening. There's blockchain technology now working, in the backgrounds that most people aren't even aware of, right? The government itself has introduced this blockchain technology so that you can also sign documents electronically. But in the purchase that I just did,
you were wet ink. A wet signature.
I had to go to the office several times to sign the document. I was like, and we deal with solicitors all the time and lawyers and conveyancers, and we just say, just send it electronically and sign it. I mean, you and I send DocuSign documents all the time.
And your solicitor said to you, for God's sake, don't put it in Royal Mail.
Yeah, because it will never get there.
It'll never get there.
So that was
there next month.
That was a fun commute. But so in 2023, with all the technological advances that we have, we are still being told that we have to go in, sign it with pen and paper, and put it in the post. And these laws as well. They you talked about serving Section 21 notice recently, right? And the date is X, and then you have to account for 2 more days, right? And everyone's asking, why 2 more days? Well, for Royal Mail, right? I'm going through a leasehold extension at the moment. It's the same thing. It's 3 months and 2 days because you have to allow for Royal Mail. It's like, what are we talking about? This is fucking ancient and needs to go.
It's going to change to your notice period plus 2 weeks because you're going to have to allow Royal Mail to actually deliver it.
I haven't had post since March.
Ridiculous. Okay. And then I think our final topic that we want to talk about today is that 78% of housing wealth belongs to over 50s.
Yeah, so that's sort of what I touched on earlier. But I used a sort of a slightly larger group. But I mean, that on its own is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. That really is quite scary. So what's stopping, do you think, people downsizing? Because a lot of people, a lot of the older generations that are living in 3 to 5 bedroom houses, and their children have moved out, and they want a sewing room or a wrapping room or a room to overwinter the geraniums and maybe have some grandchildren to stay. But why are they living in these houses? And do you think that the energy costs are going to not force people to move, but maybe motivate people to move now?
I think it will definitely motivate people because we've spoken to this sort of group, right? And they are very scared. We have a client at the moment who's choosing to sell her home as opposed to gifting it to her grandson because she doesn't want him to incur these service charges that have been increasing. To give you an idea of a communal building, and we're not going to talk about where it is, but just the figures, the electricity cost last year or the year before was £80,000 to sort of heat up this building or run the electrics. That cost today is £400,000.
Yeah.
And that has to be paid for by the
and people. It's not going to go down anytime soon, is it?
I can't see
it. This war isn't ending anytime soon, at least at the moment.
No, and also we have no alternative option for renewable energy. It's, Boris Johnson was talking about building nuclear power plants and how we fell behind doing this, and France have done it better, and that's why they don't have the same crisis.
Didn't Nick Clegg say famously 10 years ago that it would take 10 years for these to be finished?
That's right.
So, God damn it.
Yeah.
That would have been handy,
there you
right?
go. Yeah. So it's almost a generation we have to wait. But the real reason I think why people aren't downsizing is that there is not enough options for the elderly to downsize to. So in terms of retirement homes, there are nowhere near enough retirement homes. There's not enough bungalows. It's the whole thing. There's just not enough property for them to downsize. You've got the article there. I can't find it here, but there's a figure there of how much wealth can be unlocked, or should I say sits with the over 50s. And I'll see if I can find it, but from the top of my head, it was Lucian Cook who's head of research for Savills. I think the figure was something like, let's have a look. Here we are. Over 65s own £2.587 trillion in housing wealth. Housing wealth.
Yeah.
2.587 trillion.
Yeah.
That's what the market is waiting to be unlocked. It says 41% of 20 to 34-year-olds have no property wealth whatsoever. None. And they just, so what are they doing there? I guess they're selling them off, gifting them. But I mean, that's where the sort of chain blocks itself.
Yeah.
Where are they going to go?
Yeah.
I don't want to keep going back to Sweden, etc. and stuff like this, but we have as many homes for elderlies as we have for new starters. And we have always had a sort of a policy, a government policy, regardless of who's in charge, where it is your right to buy a property.
Yeah.
And we don't have a buy-to-let market in the same way you have here. It's pure investments. It's offset. So you can, if you go on holiday or you move abroad, for example, you cannot recover the full cost of the mortgage. So it's going to cost you to rent out the property. So that stops people buying for investment.
And do you have rent control in Sweden?
We don't have rent control, but that's the closest thing we have to it. Now,
Right.
I must admit, it's not popular, but it also stops people, doing these sort of massive buy-to-let investments.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Sadiq Khan's talking about rent control, isn't he? And I have to say that I think that's just another nail in the coffin of a private landlord. Yeah. I mean, that really will cause people to run. Right?
Yeah, and I think that the problem here is twofold, because the UK is a completely different beast, if you like, in terms of its property sector, its property industry, right, to the rest of Europe and to the rest of the world. So sitting here comparing, there was another article saying that, Texas is going to become the first completely green city in the world, right? Well,
Texas,
yeah,
really?
Yeah, but I mean, Texas is
what J.R. Ewing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, also the biggest oil industry, right? But
yeah.
I mean, they're pumping billions, and they've got a lot of land, and a lot of that's desert and so forth, and they've got sunshine 24/7, so they can, put up solar panels, etc. But we can't compare to that. No. We can't compete with that. No. England can't compete with Sweden, Germany, Portugal.
Although
Spain.
There should be more wind. I get more wind. This whole thing about we can't have wind farms. Why? I think they're beautiful.
Yeah,
I think those windmill things are gorgeous.
Well, you're flying.
So think they're so ugly. I think they're very attractive.
You're flying to Copenhagen this summer,
I am, yes.
Yeah. When you're landing at Kastrup Airport, you'll see just as you descend, you'll see the wind farms going straight out into I want to say the Baltic Sea. I should know, but yeah, they look beautiful. Yeah, they look absolutely stunning.
But they don't even have to be in the sea. I mean, I was in Norfolk last summer, and you could see them off the coast. But why not on land?
I think they're expensive, and in terms of what they generate, the opportunity.
Surely it's more expensive to build them in the sea than it is to build them on land.
I think it's just expensive to build them in. Yeah, perhaps, but it is also just expensive to build them, and they don't generate enough electricity to offset the cost of building them. You see, it's also politics, right? Because a government sits in power for 5 years.
Yeah, well, right? That's also yeah. So is the 5-year term the right term? Should it be 10 years so you actually have some accountability and responsibility?
Yeah, but what if you end up,
you end up with Liz Truss for 10 years.
Yeah, or Boris or Donald Trump for 10 years. I mean, I know he's an American president, but still the idea of a lunatic like that. I mean, I get you. Look, it's different here, right? In some countries, it's you vote for the man who represents the party, or also who is the party, right? And here in the UK, you choose the party.
You vote for the party, that's right.
That's hence why we've had, 5 prime ministers or 4, whatever it is. But
go down that.
But it's certain policies shouldn't be politically based, right? There should be like, okay, this is the housing policy, and it stays, and this is what's going to happen for the next 10 years, regardless of 3 different governments or whatever the case might be, right? And that might, turn into law, into, statutory law. That might change things. The UK has a real problem ahead of it because it's got a lot of also beautiful stock. Maybe we should look into how Paris does it, because Paris obviously is equally beautiful in terms of the city, right? But then, of course, they have a problem.
They've got the same problem.
They have, and they also build all their social housing on this later out districts.
And those districts. Big problems. I mean, actually, I think that the way London doesn't do that, we don't create. Not slums, we don't ghettos or areas of massive amounts of crime, although I'm sure there are still no-go areas. But the idea of having affordable housing next to wealthy housing, I think, is a good thing. And I think that's something London has done right. We just need a lot more of it. I'll tell you what is interesting, Chris. My neighbour has bought the house next door and pretty much gutted the whole thing. Did a huge basement. That was wonderful for 2 years. And that's where we did the second podcast, and that's why we couldn't use the audio. Yes, exactly, for the drilling noises. Thank goodness he's finished. But basically, this guy he insulated the entire outside of the house, and has put in solar panels. He's put in massive water tanks that collects rainwater that powers his sprinkler. I mean, that house is now. I mean, it for a start, it's never going to get hot or cold because it is so well insulated. Put in obviously all new windows and underfloor heating and all stuff like that. So it's very energy efficient. And he's also now got a little AI lawnmower that we were talking the other day about.
Your cat will be chasing that.
We were talking about anthropomorphizing robotics and how people like that, can fall in love with their AI.
Are we talking about sex bots, man?
No, we're not talking about the sex bots. Well, not yet anyway.
Not
we can
yet.
do. I'm always up for a sex bot talk. But this particular little lawnmower, I kind of felt a bit sorry for it. I was like, oh, look, there it goes again. Poor thing, working so hard and never seems to stop. But I mean, so what we were talking about is even traditional housing stock, if you've got the right money, can be made energy efficient. But how long is it going to take for all that to pay off? This guy's obviously got quite a lot of money. I looked into getting some solar panels, and Tim, my other half, is absolutely obsessed with getting solar power. But we still have gas boilers. We've actually got 2 gas boilers. So that's not going, the heating is gas. So we'd have to change the whole heating system, thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds, plus the 15 grand they wanted to put the amount of solar panels that we would need. And that would just be effectively the electricity, unless we replace the heating. So we'll take those thousands out of it. 15 years it would take for by the time it was it was paid for. And I thought, well, I mean, if I was absolutely certain that I was going to die in this house, then I think it would be worthwhile, because we could probably got another 15 on top of that 15 before we pop the clogs. So, maybe that would be worthwhile. But who can plan that far in advance, and who's got that kind of money to spend, and why aren't there government loans for this sort of thing?
Yeah, so that's it. The government has to incentivize everyone to go green by making it cheaper for them or giving them tax deductions. Sort of like, the greener your home is, the lower a certain percentage of it's got. I don't know what tax, because some people
tax could come down, for example.
Yeah, or capital gains tax, or exactly. Yeah. I'm not sure, but there has to be some sort of incentive.
Capital gains tax, that'd be a good idea. Well, no, but you don't pay capital gains at the moment on your principal residence.
No, you don't. No. It's a tough one. I mean, because you can't take it on income tax, because a lot of people, as we just mentioned, don't own property, so that would be unfair. But it has to be incentivized, and it has to be cheaper.
It does.
And I'm telling you, on the continent, it is cheaper.
Is it?
Yeah, it is cheaper. Yeah, you see it when you travel. If it's one of those sort of things, you don't notice it until you actually start looking for it. And you say you're looking to buy solar panels for your home. Suddenly you go to likes of Austria, Switzerland, or Scandinavia, wherever, and then suddenly you see them everywhere. It's like, how have I missed this? But they're everywhere. So they've obviously come to some sort of opportunity cost of it's being worthwhile.
Well, I think my electricity bill gets paid to France.
Okay. EDF.
EDF, because and I think that's a government-owned facility, isn't it? Government, yeah. So that's why their energy costs are a lot cheaper, maybe.
Yeah, subsidized,
exactly. Okay, fine. So, what else should we talk about, Chris?
Should we talk about the market?
Yeah.
In general terms?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, we are estate agents after all.
Yeah.
And if anyone is still listening, then this is something that they could maybe be interested in. So we mentioned earlier that the spring sales market's been very late in coming.
Yeah, it has. Yeah.
What would you say the reason for that is?
Well, everything and nothing, if you like. But I mean, the war in Ukraine, energy costs. Energy costs have played a massive impact. Never before have we
cost of living,
exactly, and also the EPCs, energy performance certificates. The law is changed in there in terms of who you can rent to if it's not a certain level, and that's becoming a big issue, as we just talked about. But also the cost itself.
What about lack of stock?
There is no stock. Very little stock. Every property we have multiple buyers.
Right. I was just going to say, we're sitting here saying that the market it's been a slow start, but basically we've almost run out of properties to sell. And unfortunately, we've got some new ones coming on over the next couple of days. Yeah. But we're going to competitive bids on a lot of things.
Yeah.
So there are buyers out there. Maybe people have reassessed. Well, actually, I mean, look, we do a lot of cash sales or purchases as well. So that takes the whole mortgage interest rate out of the argument altogether. But what is interesting is that there are still plenty people out there with money who want to buy.
Yeah.
But I think it's been slow because of lack of stock, because people don't go and see. Whenever I've bought anything, I've gone and seen 4 or 5 places and said, right, I'll have that one, because I know that if you're buying a terraced house, the decor might be different, but essentially you can just see the same thing again and again and again, and you can retile a bathroom or extend a kitchen or whatever. So I always know what I want to buy. But a lot of people, they go and see 30, 40, 50 100 places before they make a decision.
It's mental.
And if they can't see, if they haven't got places to see, they don't feel like they know if they're getting something good. So I think that's also slowed things. And also the weather's been bloody awful, hasn't it? This is the coldest spring in like 10 years.
Yeah. Well, it's probably the coldest spring I've ever encountered here in London, and I've been here for 22 years. Yeah, but anyway, it's been awful. And then just doom and gloom on the news, right? And that doesn't exactly create a lot of
doom and gloom, and also I think generally, I mean, we listen to a lot of news, we listen to a lot of podcasts, and there just seems to be an endless supply of doom and gloom. I mean, and the whole AI thing, I think, as well, is freaking people out more and more. More people are sort of waking up to it and thinking, oh God, one of the many things. I would hate to be a teenager these days. And I remember when I was a teenager and they were talking about nuclear, the Cold War, stuff like that, and how freaky that was at the time.
Yeah, but I have a teenager.
News channel.
Yeah, it was. But I have a teenager at home, and I can tell you that they are not at all sort of plugged into what happens in the world.
No, but come on, they are. Climate change. Look at the Greta Thunberg brigade. I mean, the kids are very engaged, I think, with climate change.
Well, I say
climate disaster.
They appear to be more engaged because social media allows them to have a voice, right? But I think the majority of kids are,
in the room.
Exactly. Well, think about when you were a kid, right?
Yeah.
There were 3 or 4 channels on TV, right? And your dad wanted to watch the news, and then everyone had to scatter somewhere else, right?
Or the rugby.
Yeah, or the rugby, exactly. Whatever the case might be. But then you sort of pick up on this, and you sit down at the dinner table, and you have a conversation, and dad and mom are talking about the world, whatever, be it, Russia's falling or the Soviet Union's falling, whatever. So you pick up on this. But nowadays, no one's doing that, right? I mean, now we're moving on to sort of socio-economic conversations. But, people don't talk anymore in the same way they used to. They sort of communicate via WhatsApp or, their phones or computers, whatever the case is. So information and news is manipulated. And 2, it's sort of headline news. Yeah, it's headline news, right? People just look. I mean, I did it this morning, funny enough. I went onto the Apple News, right?
Yeah.
I scrolled down. So I saw 20 headlines, clicked one article, right? But back in the day, you'd sort of more engage with that news and sort of see where's it coming from, who said it, and these sort of things, right? And that's a cultural
you could believe what you saw on the news for a start. Did you see that? There was a fake footage of a bombing in America. Of what was it now? Oh God, I've forgotten. There was the bombing of what's that? Is it the Pentagon? What's that?
Yeah, the Pentagon. Yeah, the Pentagon.
Yeah, and the American Stock Exchange dropped by a certain amount of points.
A few $1 trillion wiped out.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah,
that can happen. But I mean, but I don't know. I just worry about the impact that things like climate change and social media and what it's having on just anxiety generally in the world.
I mean, climate change is an important. We could do a whole topic on climate change, and it doesn't come across as sort of sexy conversations. But I mean, we live on an island here in the UK. We are surrounded by water, and rising sea levels will have a massive impact on people who own houses on the coast, on rivers. Do you remember that infographics on what London will look like in 20 years?
Yeah.
That was scary. I mean, most of it, for those who haven't seen that infographic, we should see if we can find and put it up on our Instagram, but most of London is underwater.
Would you know they're starting on a new Thames barrier?
Yeah, of course.
On the other side of the Thames barrier. There's going to be a new one.
This infographic took the Thames barrier into account. I mean, things like St. Paul's is half subdued in water.
Oh.
And I mean, that is mental.
God.
Along the Thames embankment, as you walk down, they were talking about putting up sort of reinforced glass that would, sort of hold the water back. But going up as high as 20 meters.
Excellent.
Yeah. So
okay. We veered from talking about the spring market into Armageddon.
Yeah.
So I think just going. Let's steer back to
something
the
positive,
property market.
Something positive.
The lettings market is certainly picking up pace. Last year was an absolute frenzy. Last summer.
Yeah.
And prices peaked, I think, 20% over pre-pandemic levels. And obviously it's been in the press constantly about people who are unable to find a place to rent and the massive shortage of stock. Interestingly, we work in a more expensive market, I guess, which isn't quite as frenzied. There's not quite as many people fighting over the same properties, but it's definitely picking up pace. We've got one tenant we're trying to move out of a property that they've been served notice to move out because the landlords, funnily enough, do want to sell. So even with the new laws in place, that wouldn't affect them. But they are really struggling to find somewhere to move to, and they've got a very healthy budget, you know, and that is what the summer market is. You know, that's a lot of landlords want their properties to become available around July, August, September, because that's the time to get the best rent. And I would say probably 20% up on what it was 4 months ago. Like, if you're trying to rent one property, exactly the same property, you'd probably get, well, considerably more. I'd say at least 20% more.
It's amazing how the lettings market fluctuates in price as much as it does. I mean, it's completely understandable that it's cyclical, right? As opposed to the sales market, but it's still, you know, to say that you can get 20% more if you wait 3 months. That's quite mind blowing.
Yeah, it is. Although if a property's sitting empty, I always say to landlord, let's do a quick calculation. Because, you know, if it's sitting here empty for another 3 weeks, you might as well, you know, take a slightly lower rent if we can get a tenant in right away, right?
And that is good advice, Matt.
It certainly is.
Very good advice.
It certainly is. Chris, I mean, I think that's quite a lot. We don't want to bore people to tears, so hopefully that's been interesting.
Perfect.
All right. Well, that's a goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.